You've heard the story before. Adam and Eve, a bite of a fruit. God gets angry and he kicks them out. The end, right? But what if I told you it's not how the story goes at all? And what if I told you the story doesn't even start with a tree, not with a woman, not even with the serpent? It starts with something far more surprising. It starts with dirt. Before the garden was planted, before there was anything, there was only earth. In Hebrew, Adamah. But not just any soil. This was untouched, untilled, unstepped, pure, unbothered, and packed with potential. In Hebrew, Adomeh. And from that ground, God begins to form, not speak, but form the first human, the Adam. Do you hear it? Adamah, Adomeh Adam. That's not a coincidence. That's Hebrew pulling back the curtain. The Hebrew actually says that the man was Yatsar, formed like a potter pressing clay, hands-on, intentional, and then into what he shaped. God doesn't shout. He doesn't shock it. He doesn't snap his fingers. He leans in close and breathes into Adam's nostrils. Not wind, not a storm, breath. In Hebrew, it's Neshama, the breath of lives, plural. But why plural? It has to be plural because this isn't just biological life, lungs inflating with air. This is spirit entering into his body, animation fused with essence. And this ties to one of the deepest Hebrew concepts, Shema, to hear, to receive, to let something shape you. This was intimacy from the very first moment. God breathing part of himself into humanity. Not power, connection. But here's what most people miss. Adam wasn't formed and immediately placed into the garden. Not yet anyway. Verse 15 is where Adam is put into the garden. But we see it first in verse 8. What's going on here? Why? Because before purpose, God gives perspective. Go back to verse 5. There was no rain, no plants, no one to till the ground. That's not God giving us the background. It's God giving us the setup. God first forms Adam, the one who will have dominion over all the earth. And then he plants the garden. In Hebrew, the gan, from ganan, meaning to protect, to fence in. Not just a field of beauty, it's a sanctuary, a protected space where something sacred can unfold. And then, only then, he places the man inside of it. Not to relax, but to reign in it and over it. And at the center of it all, two trees, the tree of life and the tree of knowledge of good and evil. And God's first directive. Contrary to how most of us have heard it and how others of us have been taught to read it, this is not a cold prohibition. It's an invitation. Eat freely, God says. Every tree is yours, but with one comes a warning. And in Hebrew, it's beautifully poetic. Eat, yes, eat. Or die, yes, die. This doubling isn't about legalism. It's about certainty. It's covenant language, and it tells us something important. This was never about obedience. Remember, that doesn't exist. It was about discernment. Will humanity, Shema, hear, trust, and believe God's assessment of that tree? Will they align that breath of life within them with his wisdom? Everything I'm showing you, every layer of Hebrew, every cultural detail, I unpack line by line in my book, God's Garden. I wrote it because the Eden story has been misunderstood for generations. We were told it's a story of failure, of fall. But what if it's actually the blueprint for redemption? It's available right now on Amazon. And your support will help push it toward the #1 spot so more believers like you can rediscover what the garden really means. Now get this. Even in paradise, God says some things not good. 6 times during God's creative acts, he saw that it was good. Then one final, very good, as the seal of creation. 7 times in total. But here God says, it is not good for man to be alone. The first time anything in creation is called not good is when man was alone. But God doesn't immediately create the woman. I love playing the game. One of these things is not like the other. And what should happen next? Because once again, God does something unexpected. He forms the animals. Why? Because Adam doesn't know he's missing anything yet. God doesn't tell Adam, you need a partner. He lets Adam discover it for himself. Adam names the animals, studies them, looks for reflection in them. Nothing matches. Nothing meets Adam's gaze. Only then, in that moment, when Adam feels that gap, God causes a deep sleep to fall upon him. In Hebrew, it's a Tardemah. It's not just a rest. It's a divine trance, a state of revelation. And from Adam's side, not his head to rule over, not his feet to be ruled by, but his side, God builds her. That's a different word from how Adam was made. Adam was formed, Yatsar. Eve was built, banah. The language sounds like architecture, precise, intentional, crafted. She's called Ezer Kenegdo, not helper in the assistant sense, but a strength that stands opposite of him. In fact, get this. Outside of Eve, Ezer is almost always used in the Bible to describe God himself as our strong help. That's amazing. So when Genesis uses it here, it's not a downgrade. It's actually an elevation. It's a cue to pay attention, pay close attention here. God made Adam's counterpart with the same word he uses for his own role as rescuer, defender, and ally. The woman is a mirror, an equal, a matching counterpart. And when Adam sees her, when God brings her to him, he doesn't name her like the other animals. He speaks recognition. This is bone of my bone and flesh of my flesh. The woman wasn't an addition. She wasn't an afterthought. She was the missing piece of it all. Then comes the shift. A slithering serpent. In Hebrew, aram. Subtle. And here's the surprising detail. The man and his wife were also, go back a verse, aram. Meaning the serpent wasn't introducing something foreign to them. He was twisting a capacity they already had, perception, discernment. And Eve, she doesn't eat from the tree because she was gullible. She eats because she perceives. Watch this. Rabbinic sources suggest she understood this tree wasn't about information. She saw it as about experience. To eat from it meant choosing to leave the safety of the garden and to enter into the brokenness of the world. Not because she was cursed, but because she was called. It's as if she volunteers like a doctor entering quarantine, carrying what is pure into all that was without that purity. And Adam, he eats too. Not because he fully understands, but because he trusts her. He believes his wife. And in that moment, everything shifts. The voice of the Lord comes walking into the garden, but not with wrath, but with a question. Ayyehkah, where are you? Not a question of Adam's location. It's a relationship question. Where have you gone? Where are you hiding? The intimacy that Adam and God once had is broken. The transparency is gone. For the first time, humanity feels shame. And it's not because God shamed them, but because stepping into knowledge without wisdom always feels like exposure. God says, you Shema. There's that word again. You heard the voice of your wife, but not mine. And yet, get this. God never says, I curse you. He never says, you've sinned against me. And this is beautiful because when you stop and you think about it, it changes your view and perception of God. Because yes, God names the struggle. Yes, he speaks of pain and toil. But then you have to watch him. He covers them. Not with fig leaves. That was their attempt. But with garments of skin. And here's the beauty. The Hebrew word for skin is or, and it's spelled ayin vav resh. The Hebrew word for light, or, is spelled with aleph vav resh. Just one letter apart. The former symbolizes experience, to see. The latter of power and strength, aleph. Are you interested? If you want to see hidden details like this, register for my course, The Ancient Hebrew Key, at GCLMEDIA.org. I'll leave a link in the description. God is using the terms or and or as if he was clothing them in creation's light. It's a divine covering, a holy farewell, not as an ending to the story, but as a new beginning, a father preparing his children for the road ahead. And that's where God's garden begins. Not with shame, but with strategy. Not with loss, but with launch. Eden was never meant to be a cage of perfection. It was the prototype for purpose, the blueprint for how God partners with humanity. And that's why I wrote God's Garden, to restore your understanding of Genesis, not just as a creation story, but as a commissioning story. Because Eden, it isn't a myth, it's a model. And once you see that through the lens of Hebrew, the culture, and the patterns God embedded from the beginning in his word, you'll never read your Bible the same way again. So if something in your spirit said, why didn't anyone ever teach me this? Then God's Garden is for you. Go grab your copy on Amazon right now and help push it towards that #1 spot. So many more believers just like you can rediscover what the garden really means. The link's in the description and the first pinned comment. And if you want to go deeper, watch this next video. What Adam really means in Hebrew. It'll shock you. I'll show you why the name Adam isn't just a person, it's a prophecy.